All right, let's say our blessing for learning Torah. La'asuk b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asuk b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord of God, rule of the universe, who's made us holy with your commandments and command us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. And with that, we will get very busy with very much the words of Torah. So I'm going to do a recap of what we looked at last week. So this is the story of Jacob and Esau. Last week we looked at the prologue to this 3-act story where the twins were struggling within Rebekah's womb, and Jacob emerged holding on to Esau's heel, so he got called Jacob, which means heel. And then in Act 1, we had this story where Esau was hunting and Jacob was at home cooking, and Esau came home and was very hungry. And Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright." And Esau's like, "Yeah, whatever. What good does a birthright do to me if I'm going to die of hunger?" So he sold his birthright and got some food. And that was the end of Act 1. And now we're going to go to Act 2. Don, would you read this act, please?
When Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son," he answered, "here I am." And he said, "I am old now, and I do not know how soon I may die. Take your gear, your quiver and bow, and go out into the open and hunt me some game. Then prepare a dish for me such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my innermost blessing before I die." Rebekah had been listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau had gone out into the open to hunt game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I overheard your father speaking to your brother Esau, saying, 'Bring me some game and prepare a dish for me to eat, that I may bless you with the Lord's approval before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully as I instruct you. Go to the flock and fetch me 2 choice kids, and I will make of them a dish for your father, such as he likes. Then take it to your father to eat, in order that he may bless you before he dies.' Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, 'But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am smooth-skinned. If my father touches me, I shall appear to him as a trickster and bring upon myself a curse, not a blessing.' But his mother said to him, 'Your curse, my son, be upon me. Just do as I say, and go fetch them for me.' He got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared a dish such as his father liked. Rebekah then took the best clothes of her older son Esau, which they were in the house, and had her younger son Jacob put them on. And she covered his hands and the hairless part of his neck with the skins of the kids. Then she put in the hands of her son Jacob the dish and the bread that she had prepared. He went to his father and said, 'Father,' and he said, 'Yes, which of my sons are you?' Jacob said to his father, 'I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Pray sit up and eat of my game, that you may give me your innermost blessing.' Isaac said to his son, 'How did you succeed so quickly, my son?' And he said, 'Because the Lord your God granted me good fortune.' Isaac said to Jacob, 'Come closer that I may feel you, my son.' Close to his father Isaac, who felt him and wondered. The voice is the voice of Jacob, yet the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, and so he blessed him. He asked, 'Are you really my son Esau?' And when he said, 'I am,' he said, 'Serve me and let me eat of my son's game, that I may give you my innermost blessing.' So he served him and he ate, and he brought him wine and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, 'Come close and kiss me, my son.' And he went up and kissed him. He smelled his clothes and he blessed him, saying, 'Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of the fields that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of the heaven and the fat of the earth, abundance of new grain and wine.' Let people serve you and nations bow to you. Be master over your brothers, and let your mother's sons bow to you. Cursed be they who curse you, blessed they who bless you. This is from a few chapters later after Isaac and everybody else had gotten much older. At what points could the story have been changed?
Okay, thank you, Don. So, at what points could this part of the story have been changed?
Jacob could have, I guess, just one way is that he could have felt bad and ended up telling the truth after he gone through all of the trouble of getting all this I guess this Esau costume, I'm gonna call it, to try to trick him. So he could have felt bad and been like, oh nah, I'm not Esau.
Jacob could refuse when Rebecca first suggested the whole thing.
Rebecca could have not suggested it and stood by and, let Esau do his thing.
Or she could have been a better mother.
She was showing a little partiality there, wasn't she?
I never realized until we just read it that, as I read it, I read it as Rebecca slaughtered the kids. Rebecca made the stew. Rebecca made the covering for Jacob's arms and neck. I guess I've always thought that Jacob did those things. And as David and I were talking before others started joining, that there are so many stories that, kind of learning that they don't read quite the way that I remember learning them back when I was much younger. But, I guess one of the ways it could be different is if Rebecca said, I'd like you to get the blessing, but in order to do this, you got to go do some work, as opposed to, I will do all the work and you will benefit from it.
It sounds like Isaac's faculties were very much failing by that point. So again, if you think about God intervening, maybe if Isaac had been stronger, his sense of smell, his sight, hearing, then he might not have fell victim to this deception. So I think there's some divine intervention here because, God is responsible for the aging process, most certainly, and the diminishing faculties of Isaac, because I think that comes out here.
One thing that's come up, other discussions is, was Jacob really deceived? I mean, he recognized Isaac rather. He recognized Jacob's voice. Maybe he wasn't deceived. Maybe he felt this was the right way to go.
That's an optimistic view of it, Herb, but I'm skeptical of that interpretation personally. Having said that,
I've heard
no, I appreciate it. I appreciate the idea. But I guess it just, I agree, but the voice would seem to be somewhat telling, but 3 or 4 other items point to Esau. So I can see him being deceived at that point. And to me, what's puzzling is here you have one of the 3 fathers of our faith that we say blessings to, and like Abraham with the story of Isaac and the potential sacrifice of Isaac, you have a story where a mother, Rebecca, seems to both instigate and aid and abet a tremendous deception, and I would say a terribly unethical deception. And yet it becomes a core part of our faith's his story. And why is that? I mean, why is this told as a core part of our biblical heritage about this one of our forefathers? How did he get to be the one who we become the descendants of, rather than Esau? And to me, I'm interested in hearing Act 3, David, but it's at this point, having heard and read the story before, I still remain quite puzzled.
Does anyone here think that Jacob Avinu was not the chosen one and that he had to go through this because of that? And I was going to ask David a question. David, when you asked the question, or when the question came up, how would you, where or how could things change? My question to you is going to be, and still come out with the same outcome, or come out with any outcome that you took it to with your change?
Sure. Yeah.
Because
Under the
yeah.
idea that history, and we'll call this history for the sake of argument, that history is not inevitable, that it's a set of choices that people make.
Oh God.
So we take, or God makes, so we take this to be for granted of course this is how it goes, how it comes out, like how things are going to go, but it didn't have to. So if we stop to think, when did actors in the story, human or divine, make choices, and what different choices could they have made, then that helps us to dig into the story and approach it from different perspectives than we might have thought about the story otherwise.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this as I was listening to everybody else's comments, and I'm sitting here saying, well, our friend Jacob is complicit in all of this. He's even participating with his mother and making sure that the deception is carried off well, from one hand. And then I'm thinking, well, first, where's this concept about you're lying to your father? Are you really honoring your father? But at the same time,
Yes.
he's trying to be obedient to what his mother's directions are. So I'm seeing several things there. Oh, so that he's complicit. Is this the kind of a person that you want? Someone mentioned before that's actually one of the founders of our religion, our beliefs now, as an example. So I'm wondering,
Yeah, he is.
how is this any different than what's happening in Ukraine right now?
Well,
It's not, I mean, it's not that anybody's aggressive, but the same. I mean, there's all these irreal, is it real? Someone said, something's not right. If you think of it that way, to me, I said, it's there's some complexities there, and it's not.
Who's Putin in this story then?
That's another thing. I didn't mean to get off into that.
Well, you
this
brought
is
it up.
Um,
I do want to
It's
bring up
just-
something a
it's a
little more
real-
domestic, get us back to more domestic. Obviously Jacob is culpable, Rebecca is culpable, but I was thinking about this. Do you think part of this has to do with the dysfunctional relationship perhaps between Rebecca and Isaac? That maybe she's using Jacob in a sense to exact a little revenge against her husband or to take
No.
out something on him? I mean, because she's so
How's it?
complicit in this, it made me think about that.
she's covering his butt and he's letting her.
Hmm.
She's not taking out anything on anybody except Isaac, except Esau, because she was the one. Let's take a step back if you'll permit me. And by the way, I'm an outsider, but I know David very well from years ago, and
Go ahead, Barry.
I'm
Go ahead.
enjoying.
Welcome.
Thank you. Let's take a step back to Abraham Avinu. At the time of the festival that he created for Yitzchak, and Ishmael was playing, so to speak, but he was roughhousing, and he was actually, commentary says he was threatening Yitzchak. He was threatening Yitzchak's life. And Sarah says to Abraham, send away Ishmael and his mother, send them away. And Abraham was vexed. And yet God tells him, listen to Sarah. And we find in history right then and there, with further commentary, that our foremothers seem to be, at least at certain times and in certain ways, more righteous than our forefathers. And they get foresight like our forefathers do in their way, and they see things. And Sarah was the mover of that, with God's, not only God's acquiescence, I'm pretty sure he manipulated it, God, but he told Isaac, he told Abraham, listen to her. Comes Yitzchak and Rivka. They're both praying in opposite corners of the room for Rivka, who was barren up until then, to have to be able to enjoy motherhood and have children. So God listens to Yitzchak's prayer. Again, commentary tells me that Yitzchak he came from Abraham, and we have 2 generations of righteous people here. And Rivka comes from her Padan Aram, and her brother, her uncle Lavan's, her brother Lavan's bad ways. And although she herself seems to be righteous, she doesn't get the prayer granted. Yitzchak does. But Rivka has to deal with the rumbling in her womb, and it's bothering her a great deal. So she attends to the houses of the time, right? Aver and Shem. And when she would walk by those houses, Yaakov would rise basically in within the womb, and then when she left them, Esau would rise. So there is battles going on even before the kids are born. But Yaakov starts the play here in this act 2, as you describe it. Yaakov starts the play. He buys the birthright. He does an act that sets the play in motion. And it's completely according to Rivka, because I think she has the foresight that it's supposed to be one son versus another. When one's power rises, the other one wanes. When one powers, and vice versa. So somebody's got to prevail. And Esau is not the righteous one. He's a killer. He's a hunter, but he's not only a hunter. Also, commentary tells us he's a killer. So this is not the guy who wants to be our forefather. Not only that, but he repudiates the birthright. There's commentary that says Yaakov Avinu talks to him when he's serving him the lentil soup and buying the birthright from Esau. Yaakov Avinu tells him what his responsibilities are for his birthright, and Esau repudiates them. He doesn't want those deals. He doesn't want to be the sacrificer and the spiritual leader of his family. He wants power, but he doesn't want the responsibility to be upright and lead with responsibility. So he repudiates it and he sells it wholeheartedly. It was if this was done in America today, it would be a valid contract. There was no deception with that contract. Esau knew what he was giving up, and he sold it.
So Barry, what you're saying, it sounds like, is because Rebecca saw the character of her children and Isaac, you think, it sounds like you're saying that Isaac actually might have been in agreement on this, and Rebecca was simply making it work out in such a way that it got the outcome that she and Isaac both wanted, but they had to go through the motions to make this happen.
In conclusion, yes, that's exactly what I would conclude.
Great, thank you.
So I'm puzzled.
If I could-
So I'm puzzled about the ethical approach to it. Because another approach would be to say, Barry, I have the valid contract, Father. You saw, we need to go to Father together and say, you've given up the birthright to me. Rebecca, you need to stand by me and not deceive or pretend to deceive, but seem to deceive Isaac, but to be forthright. So instead, what this presents is a story of deception of our people, by our people. And as said, I can see others of our faith using it to justify deceptive practices, I won't go to the Ukraine, I'll go to Bernie Madoff and others, to say, well, I'm acting because that's what the Lord, wanted me to have all these assets rather than you. It's just as deceptive. And this story seems to almost foster that attitude within our people. To me, it's a really problematic story as told so far.
If I
Right, and-
could, oh, sorry.
And who was the
Make a
first
point.
person who was the first one who suggested that someone sell the birthright? Who was it?
Yeah, Yaakov.
Exactly. So if you want to talk about who initiated this, it was Jacob.
I
That's
thought I
the
said
first
that. Thank
mention.
you.
So, I mean, this guy was thinking ahead. He took advantage of us, well, for whatever reason. We don't, we'll have all these explanations, and supposedly this turned out for the best, but this, the behavior, I don't know how admirable that would be if we look at it that way.
I mean, the
Is
other
that a good
thing,
measure for us to follow?
Well, I think you have to
Legal
look at
translation.
it in context of his life. And this is like a, what they call maybe a teachable moment where, he did something that was not right, but later on, he sort of gets his comeuppance on that when he deals with with Laban. So, I think, showing somebody, I mean, even if he's a prophet, doesn't mean he's perfect. It just means that, he's going through life and learning certain things that he needs to learn in order to get to a higher level.
related to that, I mean, there's also the implication of, I would say, at least why this person is still revered. Not only, obviously, you could have repented later through doing different actions, the power of tshuva and such, but also, I wonder if there's also the implication of the possibility of God to be able to redeem bad situations, generally speaking. I know how previously they were talking about, for example, when Rebecca was able to conceive, and how she had trouble with that first. I took that at least as describing God's general authority over, even in bad situations, as being able to act even in and I guess make something good out of bad situations. So I wonder if that's also similar here. Perhaps Jacob did do something wrong, his mother as well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that God will allow the results of that to ultimately ruin everything else, if he is sovereign, at least, which seems to be the implication of the text.
Jacob was perhaps a reluctant deceiver. It says in the text in verse 12, if my father touches me, I shall appear to him as a trickster. He's very worried about his father's perception of him, more so than he is about the actual act of being immoral. He's very concerned about his father's perception of him. And this particular translation is different from one that I have in my Bible, which also further shows how slowly Jacob moved around in order to do what his mother asked. She says, be upon me, just do as I say, go fetch for them. Well, in chapter 14 of my translation, it says, he went very slowly. He took and brought. He did not apply any enthusiasm to his task. So the Torah just said he went, he took and brought. He showed no need to hurry. He slowed himself down and eventually got the food to his mother. So not entirely in defense of Jacob, but that he wasn't entirely evil. And that there's a part of him that was not pleased with having to take on this role. And this is how it is represented in between the lines, maybe in the words of commentators of this particular section. You know, it's interesting that he didn't think of it as an objective, in an objective way, other than how it would affect me if my father could see me as a trickster, rather than say, gee, what are the moral implications of what you're asking me to do? It's just a thought.
Good thought.
Well, he was being clever and doing what he did, Mr. Jacob, anticipating that. And later, what did he do with Laban to increase his flocks? He said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll let me have just the spotted animals." But he had already knew how to breed those types of animals. But he didn't say that to Laban. He just said, "Oh, make that agreement." So it's increased. So he's should I use the word intelligent or clever in doing those things?
Do you remember what
So
he
is
said
that a
to
level
Yaakov when
of
he arrived?
deception, or is that just being? It sounds like one of my two grandsons, and one of them is Isaac and one is Jacob. But in this case, the one that sort of is a little bit more clever and looking to do something is Isaac. He's always looking for a way to use it, being clever enough to, in a certain sense, to set up things in his favor, even though it might not always be what we would consider ethical. Now, these are young boys now, so I'm not suggesting he's doing anything, you know, as a professional at this stage. But is that good or bad?
Okay, but doesn't he get punished later on anyway? So he doesn't come off so easily. He wanted, you know, he was in love with one daughter. He wanted to marry one, and he had to work all those years. Thought he was getting her, and then
Oh, clearly, Laban was also being clever, but maybe
yeah, right. That's right.
Well,
so was
Laban
everybody.
master
Was that
clever guy.
typical then? Everybody, or is that still today? Is that just the way things are? It hasn't changed.
What did Yaakov and Rachel talk about when Yaakov arrived, and they were talking about Lavan's character when Rachel was talking to Yaakov? Rachel warns him that Lavan is a sinister and a devious character, and Yaakov, from his previous experience at home, obviously, says, if he wants to act straight, I'll act straight. If he wants to deceive, I can be his match. And
Mid-commentary, that is.
I'm not sure if this is well-founded, but you know, we get the impression that, you know, Yitzchak, his faculties are failing, and he's really favoring Esau, despite all of this evidence that Esau really does not deserve to be the one who kind of carries the family forward, based on the fact that he likes the taste of game. You know, we're really getting the impression that this is not something that this is the sort of crisis where the leader is not making good decisions, and maybe extraordinary measures need to be taken that we don't necessarily always.
Just one faculty, his eyes. There's no other indication that he has any mental issues or any other physical conditions other than his eyes and his poor sight and his failing sight.
I suppose just that, and the fact that he's basing his favor on the fact that he just really loves meat, which doesn't really seem to say a lot about the rest of the man.
I think he's playing inside the box. He's sticking with his firstborn, and Rivka and Yaakov and Gad are trying to get him to come outside the box and to accept Yaakov. And there's a commentary analogy about a tube. And if you put two things in a narrow tube, the first one that goes in is the first one. And the second one goes in second. And then when you take them back out, what happens? The second one comes out first. And there's a metaphor or analogy of how Esau was born first. Yaakov was supposedly conceived first, and Esau comes out first because he was the higher up in the tube. He had to come out the tube first. So there's commentary there. It's an interesting play throughout the parsha.
Kids move around there.
I'd like to suggest just add another element here. These are deeply flawed people. And throughout our stories of our history, we have lots of flawed people. We're supposed to assume, I think, that people have the power to affect our destiny. That, and yet, the other element is that God has a plan, and God's plan is going to work its way out, regardless of all of our failings and foibles. And I can't help thinking that the plan was for Jacob to be the father of our people, and that this has been preordained.
Sounds good to me. Well said.
I think going along those lines as well, if we look at the three patriarchs, I think a lot of evidence shows that Isaac was probably the least strong of the three. Is kind of like the placeholder between Abraham and Jacob and Israel. So I'm wondering if this is just another evidence of the fact that, he made a poor decision, if you look at it that way. I mean, giving the blessing to, quote unquote, the inappropriate son of the son that tricked him. And he was also obviously kind of dominated by his wife and tricked by his wife and by his son. So yeah, I think this just adds more to the idea that he may have been the weakest of the three patriarchs.
You might want to rethink that weakness aspect when you go back for a step and think about the Akedah. When Yitzchak stepped up and he was a willing sacrifice for his father, he knew what he was doing. He knew what was going on. He allowed himself to be bound on an altar, and he had faith. And that three phrase that God remembers his covenant with Yaakov, and he remembers Yitzchak, and he remembers his covenant with Abraham, and the one that he doesn't have to remember is Yitzchak, because Yitzchak's ashes, symbolic ashes, are in front of him. They're right in front of God's eyes forever. And so Yitzchak is maybe the one who had the most strength to be willing to die for his father's covenant.
I think that's interesting, but I'm going to have to disagree with you, Barry, because I feel strongly that Isaac, if you go back to the Akedah story, he could have handled things a little bit differently, instead of putting himself at risk. So I mean, I just feel that there's more strength and conviction with Abraham and with Jacob. And I just feel Isaac is kind of like the sandwich. Sometimes he's kind of between two strikes. That's just my opinion, based on that. And I think it's also, again, a subjective approach, the way you might look at strength and weakness. So that's just my 2 cents.
One thing we seem to be forgetting is that when the twins were born, Jacob was holding on to Esau's heel, and the red cord around Jacob's wrist, knowing that he was supposed to be the firstborn. And Rebecca, knowing this, did she just do what she did in order to ensure that what God had ordained was going to happen? Jacob would get the firstborn's blessing?
Well, if God ordained it, wouldn't they come out in the reverse order from what was stated?
You think so, but Esau was rather a strong guy, and he pushed Jacob aside so he could come out first.
I think, point of clarification, I think that may be a conflation of the story of Judah's son.
Right. Peretz and his brother, right?
Yeah, that again, twins.
Right.
That one of them put his hand out first, and then got a thread tied on it, and then he drew back his hand, and the other one came out first. So
Good
that may be a
recollection.
conflation.
Yeah.
Not that there are that many stories of twins, so it's easy to get them confused.
You make a point, David.
All right, let's go into Act 3. Morris, would you read this, please?
No sooner had Jacob left the presence of his father Isaac, after Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, than his brother Esau came back from his hunt. He too prepared a dish and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, "Let my father sit up and eat of his son's game, so that you may give me your innermost blessing." His father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am your son Esau, your firstborn." Isaac was seized with a very violent trembling. "Who was it then," he demanded, "that hunted game and brought it to me? Moreover, I ate of it before you came, and I blessed him. Now he must remain blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he burst into wild and bitter sobbing and said to his father, "Bless me too, father." But he answered, "Your brother came with guile and took away your blessing." Esau said, when he then named Jacob, that he might supplant me these 2 times? Or was he then named Jacob, who supplanted me these 2 times? Let's see, where am I?
At the top of the screen.
First, he took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing. And he added, "Have you not reserved the blessing for me?" Isaac answered, saying to Esau, "But I have made him master over you. I have given him all his brothers for servants and sustained him with grain and wine. What then can I still do for you, my son?" And Esau said to his father, "Have you but one blessing, father? Bless me too, father." And Esau wept aloud. And his father Isaac answered, saying to him, "See, your abode shall enjoy the fat of the earth and the dew of heaven above. Yet by your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restive, you shall break his yoke from your neck." Now Esau harbored
Going up to the top.
a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing which his father had given him. And Esau said to himself, "Let but the mourning period of my father come, and I will kill my brother Jacob." When the words of her older son Esau were reported to Rebekah, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. Now, my son, listen to me. Flee at once to Haran, to my brother Laban. Stay with him a while until your brother's fury subsides, until your brother's anger against you subsides, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will fetch you from there. Let me not lose you both in one day." Rebekah said to Isaac, "I am disgusted with my life because of the Hittite woman. If Jacob marries a Hittite woman like these from among the native women, what good will life be to me?" So Isaac sent for Jacob and blessed him. He instructed him, saying, "You shall not take a wife from among the Canaanite women. Up, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take a wife there from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May El Shaddai bless you, make you fertile and numerous, so that you become an assembly of peoples. May he grant the blessing of Abraham to you and your offspring, that you may possess the land where you are sojourning, which God assigned to Abraham." Then Isaac sent Jacob off, and he went to Padan Aram, to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, and the brother of Rebekah, mother of Jacob and Esau. When Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him off to Paddan Aram to take away from there, charging him as he blessed him, "You shall not take away from among the Canaanite women," and that Jacob obeyed his father and mother.
Sorry.
Sorry. Give me time to breathe. Are sojourning with God assigned to Abraham. And Isaac sent Jacob off, and he went to Paddan Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, mother of Jacob and Esau. When Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him off to Paddan Aram to take away from there, charging him as he had blessed him, "You shall not take away from among the Canaanite women," and that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother and gone to Paddan Aram, Esau realized that the Canaanite women displeased his father Isaac. So Esau went to Ishmael and took a wife in addition to the wives he had. Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, son of Abraham, sister of Nebaioth. This is from right after the previous text. At what points could this story have changed?
Thank you. Yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah.
And Rebecca finds a way to get what she wants, no matter what.
Well, if Mr. Esau was also being deceptive because he already knew that he sold his birthright and he still went after it. If he would have admitted that, as someone mentioned earlier, or confessed that, then maybe there wouldn't have been so much animosity.
But here Isaac blesses him again. So are we sure that he didn't know initially that he was blessing Jacob?
I have no way of knowing. I
I'm
wasn't
not
there, and we're all speculating.
By you saying he's as deceptive as Rebecca, Herb?
No, but
No,
I think he might have realized that it was Isaac he was blessing in the first place. Otherwise, would he not be upset and not give Jacob this blessing and send him off to safety to get a wife from his brother-in-law?
Why
uncle.
could not
His
Isaac,
uncle, right?
why could Isaac not, I don't know the legalities here, why could Isaac not reverse the blessing if he realized by that point that he gave the blessing in error because he gave it to the wrong son, if that's what he believed? Was there no mechanism for a blessing to be revoked and replaced by another one?
What
Because
does
it's
it tell
almost
you?
like he's admitting admitting error. That's what I'm looking at.
No,
Not a
there's
giver.
once the words are out of your mouth, you can't take them back.
But I agree with Herb that you point out that in spite of you would think annoyance or anger because he was deceived, Isaac was very loving and concerned about sending his son off to family members and into a place of safety. So I can see what you're saying there, Herb.
Well, getting back to the question about what could have changed, if Rebecca hadn't heard Esau's threat, so to speak, or she chose to ignore it, then the story would be very different as far as the fate of Jacob. So, I mean, I think that could have been a part for a change, what she heard and how she handled that information.
Not sure I agree with you, because if you read ahead, when they meet again, they depart their ways, but Jacob is still living it. Isaac is still alive at that point. Esau does not hold any animosity, apparently. And then they come together again when Jacob dies to bury him, or rather when Isaac dies to bury him.
Mhm.
And they depart, and Esau makes no effort to kill Jacob. Well, I'm not so sure
Years
that.
later, I mean, that was years later. I'm talking in the context of what we just read.
Except that Esau vowed to kill Jacob after Isaac died. When it was a period during the Shiva for Isaac is when he vowed he would kill him, not during Isaac's lifetime.
So then Isaac lived quite a long while then afterwards, if Jacob spent so much time waiting for
At least 20 years.
Rachel.
Rachel.
Hmm.
They didn't wait that long. They married almost right after each other. After Yaakov marries, Yaakov works 6 years, and then he gets deceived into marrying.
Oh, he married,
Leah.
but correct.
But that was the sister league. The sisters
But-
got together between Lavan and the two sisters. It was a fait accompli because Rachel gave Leah her secret code basically as to how Yaakov would identify that Rachel was the right bride. Nobody-
That is
Lavan
a
could do.
that is a midrash. It's not actually in the text, but it is
That's
a
right.
story that is told to explain how this could possibly have happened.
Is it off limits? Should I not say it then?
Yeah, but
You
either way,
you can say it, just identify it as midrash.
Okay, noted and appreciated. Okay, there you go.
right. Let's go to
But they did marry sequentially, and then Yaakov worked 6 more years for Rachel, but he already had married her after the Sheva Bracha with Leah, right?
I
Yeah.
thought
the
it was
sequence right there?
14.
I will send a follow-up email to clarify that. I want to, with our last 2 minutes, look at the epilogue. So I'm not going to have someone read it, but Jacob and Esau meet 20 years later. And Esau runs to greet Jacob and embraces him and falls on his neck and kisses him, and they weep. And Esau meets Jacob's family. And then Esau says, we should travel together. We should all go at your pace because you've got a lot of young children. And Jacob says, I really appreciate that, but my kids move slowly and I've got a lot of animals and they also move slowly. So why don't you go ahead? You go and I'll catch up with you at Seir. And Esau says, well, no problem, but let me give you some people to accompany you. And Jacob says, no, it's really okay. You're too kind, no worries. And so Esau goes on to Seir, and Jacob goes to Sukkot and builds a house for himself and stalls for his cattle. That's why the place is called Sukkot. And I don't believe Jacob ever makes it to Seir, but he and Esau do come together to bury Isaac later. There are 2 musical versions of this that I am aware of. One is a Safam song, Safam being a Jewish American rock group. You can listen to the song on the source sheet, and then I have the link for the lyrics. And then the Grateful Dead also have a song called My Brother Esau. And here are the lyrics for that as well. And then there's an appendix where you can read the whole story uninterrupted.